In this day and age, fame is a weird thing. You have movie stars, you have politicians, and then you have guys like Cain Rourke. If you've spent any time online, you know him. Ex-Special Forces, survivalist guru, the prophet of the coming collapse. His YouTube channel has 50 million subscribers. He sells high-tech survival gear, heirloom seeds, and a philosophy. The world is a house of cards, and you better have your own fortress when it falls. And Cain Rourke built the ultimate fortress. He calls it the Haven, a completely self-sufficient, high-tech compound buried deep in the fog-shrouded Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. For his millions of followers, it's a paradise, a blueprint for survival. For his critics, it's a paranoid, isolated cult. No journalist has ever been allowed inside for more than a few hours, until me. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I'm an investigative reporter. For 6 months, I negotiated for exclusive, unrestricted access to the Haven and to the man himself. I finally got it. A 7-day embed to document their annual blackout protocol. A week where they completely sever all contact with the outside world. No internet, no phones, no radio. A full-scale simulation of the end of the world. I went in expecting to find a story about paranoia, about a charismatic leader and his devoted followers. I thought the monster I was hunting was a human one. I was wrong. I had no idea what Rourke was really preparing for. I didn't know about the local legends, about the history of the land he built his fortress on. I didn't know about the thing the old-timers in the mountains call the Tatter-Sliver Man. What follows are the recordings I made during that week inside the Haven. They were supposed to be for a documentary. Now they're a warning about a man who tried to build a wall against the chaos of the world, only to find out the real horror was already inside. The road to the Haven doesn't appear on any map. You follow a winding West Virginia state highway until you reach a designated pull-off, a simple gravel patch on the side of a mountain. That's where I left my rental car. A matte black, unmarked truck with military-grade tires was waiting for me. The driver was one of Rourke's men, silent, bearded, with the kind, calm, watchful eyes that have seen too much. We drove for an hour on a private, unpaved road that climbed deeper and deeper into the mountains. The fog grew thicker, clinging to the ancient dark green trees. It was beautiful, but it was an oppressive beauty, a beauty that felt like it was hiding something. And then we arrived. The Haven isn't a collection of cabins. It's a fortress. A 20-foot-high perimeter wall made of reinforced concrete and black steel slices through the forest, a man-made scar on the pristine wilderness. At the top, you can see the glint of razor wire and the dark domes of security cameras. It's less of a community and more of a prison camp. The main gate hissed open, and we drove into the compound. The contrast was jarring. Inside the brutalist walls was a perfectly manicured, almost surgically clean community. Sleek, Modern buildings with grass roofs were interconnected by heated stone pathways. I could see massive greenhouses, the glint of solar panels, and the silent, imposing dome of what the driver called the geocore, their geothermal power plant. It was a utopian village inside a military bunker. Cain Rourke met me in the central plaza. In person, he was even more intense than on camera. He was tall, lean, with a face that looked like it was carved from oak. His charisma was a physical force, an energy that pulled you in. "Sarah," he said, his voice a calm, confident baritone. "Welcome to the future." He gave me the grand tour, explaining the hydroponic farms, the water filtration systems, the state-of-the-art medical bay. It was impressive, genius even. But as he showed me the perimeter wall's command center with its motion sensors and thermal imaging, I noticed something odd. The security was facing the wrong way. The fortifications weren't designed to keep people in. They were designed to keep something out. That evening, Rourke gathered all the residents in the communal dining hall for a final briefing before the blackout protocol began. There were about 50 of them, families, former soldiers, doctors, engineers. All of them looked at Rourke with an expression of absolute, unwavering trust. "Tomorrow at dawn, the haven goes dark," he announced, his voice echoing in the minimalist concrete hall. "For 7 days, the outside world will cease to exist. This is not a game. This is a test of our systems, but more importantly, a test of our minds. Isolation is a weapon. It can be used against you. Your own subconscious will become the enemy." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he smiled, a disarming, charismatic grin. "Now, the locals here have a ghost story, a boogeyman. They call him the Tatter-Sliver Man." A few nervous chuckles went through the crowd. "The legend says he's a tall, thin thing, made of broken branches and torn cloth, that wanders these specific mountains. They say he's drawn to silence, to places where the noise of the world has gone quiet. They say he preys on the minds of the lonely, whispering doubts into their heads until they go mad." He sounded like a camp counselor telling a story by the fire, but his eyes were deadly serious. "During this week, your mind, under stress, might play tricks on you. You might think you see a flicker of movement at the edge of the woods. You might imagine shapes in the fog. This legend is a perfect crucible for our training. It is the personification of the paranoia we must overcome. If you can defeat the monster in your head, no real-world threat can ever break you." I furiously took notes, my recorder capturing every word. This was the story. A charismatic leader using a local folktale as a psychological tool to stress test his followers. It was brilliant. It was manipulative. It was terrifying. Rourke raised a hand to dismiss the meeting. "Get a good night's sleep, and remember," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "if you hear a whistling on the wind late at night, it's just the mountains breathing. Don't let your imagination run away with you." Dawn broke, thick and gray, the sun a pale suggestion behind the Appalachian fog. The blackout protocol began not with an alarm, but with a low, resonant hum.
I stood with Rourke and the other residents in the central plaza as the final lockdown sequence commenced. It was a somber, ritualistic affair. Massive steel shutters slid down over the few windows that faced outward. We watched on a large monitor as the main gate was sealed, followed by a secondary inner blast door. Rourke himself, with a ceremonial gravity, physically unplugged the fiber optic cable that connected them to the outside world. The monitor showing the global news feed went to static. The Wi-Fi signal on my laptop vanished. We were officially dark, an island in the middle of a continent. The first day was eerily calm. The residents were a hive of quiet, purposeful activity. They tended the hydroponics, ran drills in the medical bay, and maintained the power systems. There was no panic, only a deep, ingrained sense of purpose. I spent the day recording interviews, documenting their unwavering belief that this was necessary, that they were the sane ones in a world gone mad. It was fascinating, but the underlying tension was palpable. The air itself felt heavy, charged. The true test began after nightfall. The compound was illuminated by low-powered, functional lighting. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all other sound. In my small, Spartan room, I tried to log my notes, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the building felt amplified. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, carried on the wind from the forest outside the walls. A high-pitched, thin, melodic tune. It wasn't the chaotic sound of wind rushing through trees. It was a simple three-note tune, rising and falling. It's just the mountains breathing, I told myself, repeating Rourke's words like a mantra. It's suggestion, your mind is playing tricks. The whistling stopped. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I walked over to the reinforced window, peering out into the foggy darkness of the compound. Everything was still. Then, on the far side of the compound, a powerful, motion-activated floodlight mounted on the perimeter wall snapped on, bathing a 50-foot section of the concrete in harsh, white light. I stared, my heart pounding, waiting to see the deer or coyote that had triggered it. But there was nothing there, just an empty patch of ground in front of an impenetrable wall. After a full minute, the light snapped off, plunging the area back into darkness. But something had been there. Something had set it off.
The next morning, an undercurrent of anxiety had crept into the compound's sterile efficiency. People moved a little faster. Their conversations were a little quieter. Their glances towards the perimeter wall a little more frequent. At the morning meal, I overheard two residents talking in low, hushed tones. "Did you hear it last night?" one asked, not making eye contact. "The whistling, yeah. Rourke was right, it really gets in your head," the other replied, trying to sound casual, but his grip on his coffee mug was white-knuckled. I approached Rourke as he was inspecting the greenhouse. "That floodlight on the west wall went off last night," I said, my voice neutral, journalistic. "System logs say what triggered it." He didn't look away from the rows of perfect green lettuce. "Probably a fog bank rolling through. The thermal sensors are sensitive. They can mistake a sudden temperature drop for movement. It's a glitch we're working on." His answer was smooth, plausible, too plausible. He was dismissing it before I could even ask the follow-up. He was managing the narrative. I spent the day observing the residents, my camera rolling. A child drew a picture of her family, but in the background, she drew a tall, stick-like figure with long, spindly arms, half hidden behind a tree. When her mother asked who it was, the girl just shrugged and said, "The quiet man." Later, while reviewing footage from one of my static cameras overlooking the plaza, I caught something. It was just a few frames. One of the residents, a hardened ex-Marine named Jax, was walking across the plaza. He suddenly stopped, his head snapping to the side as if he'd heard a voice. He stood frozen for a full 10 seconds, then shook his head violently and continued on his way. He'd heard something I couldn't. That evening, the whistling returned. This time, it was closer, louder. The simple 3-note tune felt less like a random natural sound and more like a signal. It was answered by another floodlight snapping on, this time on the north wall, then another on the east, and another on the south. One by one, the lights on the impenetrable wall began to turn on and off in a slow, deliberate sequence, as if something was calmly, patiently circling the entire compound, testing the defenses. By the third morning, the facade of utopian calm had completely shattered. The incident with the floodlights, what everyone was now calling the patrol, was impossible to ignore. Rourke's theory about a simple glitch was contradicted by the slow, methodical, and intelligent pattern of the lights. It felt like a predator testing the fences of its enclosure. The compound was on edge. Arguments broke out over meals. People started hoarding supplies from the communal pantry. That perfect trust in Rourke's leadership was beginning to fray. He called another assembly that evening, his face a stern, unreadable mask. "This is exactly what the protocol is designed to expose," he declared, his voice booming with authority. "Weakness, doubt, fear. You saw a pattern in the lights because your brain is desperate to find patterns in chaos. The system is being stress tested, and so are you. Do not fail that test." He was magnificent. He was calming them, reassuring them, twisting the narrative back into his control. But as I watched him, I didn't feel reassured. I felt a cold certainty that he was lying. He knew exactly what was happening, and he wasn't telling us. I had to get to the source. During my initial tour, Rourke had shown me his private study, boasting that it contained a hardline terminal with direct, unfiltered access to the security mainframe. It was the one place I could see the raw data, free from his interpretation. It was also the one place I was explicitly forbidden from entering. That night, as the compound settled into a tense, restless sleep, I slipped out of my room. The fog was thick, muffling my footsteps on the stone pathways. Rourke's study was in a small, isolated building overlooking the darkest part of the forest. I picked the simple electronic lock on the door,
a skill I'd picked up on a previous assignment, and slid inside, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was dark, smelling of leather and old books. I closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing in the silence. I was in the belly of the beast. I turned on my phone's flashlight, aiming it at his desk, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a desk, it was an altar, and the idol he was worshiping was the Tatter-Sliver Man.
My flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing the true nature of Cain Rourke's obsession. The walls weren't covered in survivalist plans. They were plastered with ancient yellowed maps of the region, historical documents, and dozens upon dozens of frantic charcoal sketches of the same terrifying figure. A tall, impossibly thin man made of sticks and rags, with long, grasping fingers. On his desk, next to a high-end computer, was the source of the research. Piles of old police reports detailing unsolved disappearances in these mountains going back 100 years. Witness testimonies from terrified farmers and lost hikers, all describing a whistling wind and a walking man of sticks. Rourke wasn't a skeptic trying to debunk a myth. He was a true believer trying to prove it. His monitor was still on, displaying a complex acoustic analysis of a sound wave. It was labeled TSM Vocalization Night 2. It was the whistling. His notes in the margins were chillingly technical. Complex harmonic structure, non-biologic, non-aeolian origin. This is a signal. In the center of the desk, like a holy relic, sat a small man-shaped doll, crudely fashioned from tied twigs and a scrap of faded gray cloth, an effigy. The terrible truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The Haven wasn't built here to escape the world. It was built here as a lure. The blackout, the silence, the 50 isolated souls generating a psychic beacon of fear and paranoia. It was all bait. Rourke wasn't trying to keep the monster out. He was trying to invite it in. As I stood there, paralyzed by this revelation, a faint sound trickled from the computer's speakers. A soft, rhythmic scratching. I leaned in closer, realizing I was listening to a live feed from one of the perimeter microphones. The scratching was coming from outside. It sounded like a dry branch being dragged slowly, deliberately across the 20-foot concrete wall. Then, through the speakers, the whistling began. It was louder and clearer than I had ever heard it before. A sharp, piercing, three-note melody. The scratching stopped. The whistling continued for a moment. Then it too fell silent. It was right outside, and Rourke was listening. My own breathing sounded like a thunderstorm in the dead silence of the study. The scratching, the whistling. It wasn't just a sound on the wind anymore. It was an intelligence. It was at the wall. My eyes darted from the speakers to Rourke's monitor, which was still displaying the acoustic analysis.
I fumbled with the mouse, my hands slick with sweat, and minimized the audio program. The desktop was a mess of files, but one icon stood out, a live feed from the perimeter cameras. I double-clicked it. A grid of 16 different camera angles filled the screen, most of them showing empty, fog-shrouded sections of the compound. I scanned the labels, looking for the one that matched the microphone I'd been listening to. West Wall, Sector 4. I clicked on it, maximizing the feed. The view was from a thermal camera, looking down from the top of the wall at the forest outside. The world was a ghostly landscape of grays and blacks. The trees were cool, the ground was cool. A deer would have glowed like a white flame. At first I saw nothing, just the silent, cold trees. My heart began to calm. It was nothing, a branch, an animal. Then, a flicker of movement. From between two massive pine trees, a shape stepped out. It was tall, impossibly, unnaturally tall and thin, like a man stretched on a rack. It moved with a slow, disjointed grace, and it was pitch black. In a world of thermal grays, it was a void. It had no heat signature at all. It was the temperature of the dead. As I watched, paralyzed, the black shape on the screen raised one of its long, spindly arms. It reached out and touched the concrete wall. Through the still active speakers on the desk, I heard it perfectly. The dry, deliberate scratch, scratch, scratch of a branch on stone. It knew we were watching. A new sound cut through my terror, the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path just outside the study. Someone was coming. Rourke! My blood turned to ice. I frantically slammed the mouse, closing the camera feed just as the small electronic lock on the study door beeped. I killed the flashlight on my phone and dove behind a large leather armchair in the corner of the room. The door handle turned, and the study door swung silently open, flooding the room with the dim light from the outside path. I held my breath, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest.
Rourke stepped into the room, a tall silhouette against the dim outdoor light. He didn't turn on the overheads. He moved with a quiet, predatory confidence in the near darkness, his form passing just feet from where I was hiding. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, making myself small, trying to stop the frantic pounding of my own heart. He sat down at his desk, the chair groaning softly. The only light in the room was the pale glow from the monitor as he brought the screen back to life. He opened the exact same thermal camera feed I had been watching. West Wall, Sector 4. The black, heatless shape of the Tatter-Sliver Man was still there, standing patiently by the wall. From the speakers, the soft, rhythmic scratchings started again. Rourke didn't look scared. He looked vindicated. He leaned forward, his face illuminated in the ghostly light of the monitor, an expression of intense, rapturous concentration on his features. He was communing with it. He typed a short line into a text file on his screen. Subject: remains engaged. Proximity test successful. Phase 2 can begin. He was running an experiment, and the creature outside was his subject. Or perhaps we were. My mind raced. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here trapped in this lunatic's private chapel. As Rourke remained fixated on the screen, a sudden, loud clatter echoed from the direction of the kitchens, followed by a muffled shout.
The growing panic among the residents had created my diversion. Rourke's head snapped towards the door, his attention momentarily pulled away from the monitor. It was my only chance. Moving with a slowness that was agony, I eased myself out from behind the chair. I slid towards the still open door, my feet whispering on the floor. I was almost there. My hand was on the doorframe when my jacket snagged on a small end table, knocking a pen to the floor. It landed with a soft tick. Rourke's head whipped around, his eyes piercing the darkness directly where I stood. I froze, my body rigid with terror. I was caught. His eyes scanned the shadows for a long, silent moment. I could see the cold calculation in them. Then, dismissing the sound, he turned back to the monitor, his focus returning to the entity outside. I didn't wait for a second chance. I slipped out of the doorway and back into the main corridor, my back pressing against the cold wall as I gasped for air. I had the truth. It was worse than I ever imagined. That's when I heard it, coming from the main hall, a raw, piercing scream of pure terror. The chaos wasn't just outside the walls anymore. It was starting inside.
Adrenaline overriding my fear, I ran towards the scream, my camera held tightly in my hand. I burst into the dining hall to a scene of total chaos. The disciplined, quiet community had dissolved into a panicked mob. People were shouting, some were crying. Standing on one of the heavy oak cables was Jax, the ex-Marine, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wild with terror. He was the one who had screamed. "It was in the greenhouse," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I saw it. Right there, looking at me through the glass. The stick man." A wave of panicked murmurs washed through the crowd. The greenhouse was inside the walls, the one place they were supposed to be safe. "It's not real, Jax. Get a grip," a woman shouted, though her voice trembled. "It was," he screamed back. "It was standing there, in the tomato vines. It wasn't outside. It's in here. It's in here with us." The implication of his words was a virus spreading through the room in an instant. The concrete walls were their religion. The belief in their safety was the only thing holding them together. If that was a lie, then everything was. That's when Rourke stormed into the hall, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury. "Enough," he boomed, his voice silencing the room. "Jax, get down from there. This is exactly what I warned you about. Your mind is creating a phantom. The fear is the real enemy." "No," Jax sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Rourke. "This is your fault. You brought us here. You wanted this to happen." As Jax's accusation hung in the air, the lights in the dining hall flickered violently, once, twice. Then, with a loud buzz, they all went out simultaneously, plunging the 50 residents into absolute, suffocating darkness. The only light was the dim red glow of the emergency exit signs. The silence lasted for a single heartbeat before it was shattered by a new wave of collective, terrified screams. The monster wasn't just at the gates anymore. We were all trapped in the dark with it.
In the pitch-black chaos, the screams were deafening. I instinctively raised my camera and switched on the night vision. The dining hall appeared on my screen in the ghostly green glow. I scanned the panicked crowd, and then I saw it. Standing perfectly still in a far corner. A tall, impossibly thin figure, a calm void in the middle of the storm. Then, like a glitch in a video feed, it was gone. Jax was right. It was inside with us.
A moment later, the emergency generators sputtered to life, bathing the corridors in a pulsing, hellish red light.
Rourke seized control, his voice a roar that cut through the panic. "This is a test. To your rooms now. Lock your doors and wait for the all clear." He wasn't containing a threat. He was isolating his lab rats. In the pitch-black chaos, the screams were deafening. I instinctively raised my camera and switched on the night vision. The dining hall appeared on my screen in a ghostly green glow. I scanned the panicked crowd, and then I saw it, standing perfectly still in a far corner. A tall, impossibly thin figure, a calm void in the middle of the storm. Then, like a glitch in a video feed, it was gone. Jax was right. It was inside with us.
Moving through the deserted, red-lit corridors was terrifying. Every shadow looked like a threat. As I rounded a corner, I froze. It was standing at the far end of the hallway, maybe 50 feet away, the Tatter-Sliver Man. It was impossibly tall and thin, a shifting silhouette of sticks and rags. It didn't move like a person. It just was. It tilted its head, observing me, and then simply dissolved into the shadows. It didn't attack. It just wanted me to know it could be anywhere. I made it to the geocore. The place was humming with a strange, unstable energy. Alarms were flashing on a maintenance terminal. I bypassed the lockout and pulled up the primary power logs. It wasn't a failure. The system wasn't losing power. It was rerouting it. Massive, dangerous amounts of energy were being diverted from the compound's life support and channeled directly into the perimeter fence. Staring at the power grid schematic, the insane truth of Rourke's experiment hit me. The fence wasn't a wall, it was an antenna, a massive 20-foot-high amplifier. He was using the entire compound as a battery to create a giant electromagnetic field, trying to resonate with the creature's frequency. He wasn't defending against it. He was trying to capture it, or become its radio.
Magnificent, isn't it? Rourke's voice came from the doorway behind me. He stood there, his face glowing with fanatical excitement. It's an intelligence older than these mountains. It communicates on a different wavelength. I am about to become the first human in history to make contact. He was no longer a survivalist. He was a mad scientist standing before his greatest, most terrible creation.
"You're going to kill us all," I shouted, backing away from him. "No," he said, his eyes wide with religious fervor. "I am going to save us." As he spoke, a new alarm blared, a piercing, continuous shriek, a proximity alert from inside the walls. The power surge had worked. It was a lure, and the creature had taken the bait. It hadn't broken through the wall. It had simply stepped through. Rourke turned away from me, his face filled with triumph, and looked toward the center of the humming geocore. The Tatter-Sliver Man stood there, unfolding from the shadows like a stain of ink. Rourke took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "I am here," he whispered.
The creature moved faster than my eye could follow. Rourke's triumphant expression didn't even have time to change to a scream. He just ended.
The creature, that heatless void of sticks and rags, turned its attention to me. There was nowhere to run. It was between me and the only exit. I looked at the power console, at the massive energy being channeled to the fence. There was only one option left. It wasn't a weapon. It was a self-destruct button. I lunged for the console and slammed my hand on the emergency purge switch, reversing the energy flow. The world turned white. An EMP blast, far more powerful than intended, erupted from the geocore. All the lights, the alarms, the humming, everything just stopped. I woke up hours, maybe days later. The haven was dead, a silent, powerless tomb. I was the only one left. I walked out and was eventually found, delirious, by a hunter weeks later. The official story was a cult, a power failure, mass hysteria. But I know the truth. And last night I saw a news report. A small town in the remote Colorado Rockies. Strange whistling sounds on the wind. 2 hikers have gone missing. He didn't capture it. He set it free.
So, that's the truth. That's the story they buried under mass hysteria and technical failure. But now, you've heard it. You're a witness, just like me. If you believe this warning needs to be heard, hit the like button. The more people who know, the harder it is to pretend these things aren't real. And if you want to know what I find next, you need to subscribe. I'm still following the trail of strange disappearances, and I'll post everything I uncover right here. But the question that keeps me awake at night is this. If Rourke's Haven acted like an antenna that let this thing travel, where do you think it will show up next? Let me know your theories in the comments. Stay safe and listen to the wind.